One morning, he woke up to find his boat missing from his own lake. But what they really stole was the patience of the wrong man. They thought they owned the place, until they learned the hard truth. They didn't. And that was just the beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like, because every story might open someone else's eyes. And who knows, maybe one day, your story will be told here too. As Daniel Weber stared at the letter in his hand, his jaw tightened with a kind of fury he couldn't hide even if he tried. His blood was starting to boil. Could these people seriously be this shameless? The Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association was demanding he remove his boat from his own lake within 48 hours, or face a $500 fine per day. They even threatened to tow it away and charge him for it. As he read through the letter, dripping with smug, condescending language, a sarcastic smile crept onto his face. These bureaucrats had been using the lake without permission for years, and now they thought they could make the rules on his property? It wasn't just ridiculous, it was downright insulting. Daniel muttered under his breath, "Let's see who makes the rules now." 6 months ago, Daniel had been just another overworked cybersecurity engineer in Silicon Valley. He'd spent the last decade building a startup from scratch, one that developed security systems for major banks. But after a tech giant made him a life-changing acquisition offer, he sold everything and walked away from the grind. No more investors, no more deadlines. He was 40, financially set, and completely burned out. All he wanted was peace. And that's when he remembered something he hadn't thought about in years: the lake house. Weber Lake, as it was called, had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather, once a fisherman, later a devoted environmentalist, had bought the 50-acre property back in the 1950s and built a small cabin by the shore. Over the years, he'd used it as a retreat to fish, write, and teach local kids about respecting nature. Daniel could still picture those innocent summer days from his childhood, swimming in the lake, listening to his grandpa's old stories, and staring down into water so clear you could see 6 meters deep. His grandfather used to say, "Water is life, Daniel. Not just for the fish, for all of us. Don't let anyone tell you money comes before nature." That phrase stuck with him, even during his hectic tech career. After his grandfather passed, and later, his father too, the lake and cabin were left to Daniel. But he hadn't visited in years. He'd been too busy surviving, building, pitching to investors. But now he had time. He renovated the cabin from top to bottom, added plumbing, internet, a few comforts, but kept its rustic charm intact. And that spring, he moved in. His days were simple: morning coffee on the dock, fixing up things around the cabin in the afternoon. And in the evenings, he'd take his grandfather's old boat out to the middle of the lake and fish. Life started to feel meaningful again. Until that morning. Like always, he grabbed his coffee and walked down to the dock, only to spot something taped to the side of his boat: a bright orange notice. "Violation," it read. Apparently, keeping an unregistered and aesthetically disruptive boat on the lake was against community guidelines. If he didn't remove it, there'd be consequences. At first, Daniel thought it was some kind of prank. But back at the cabin, he checked the mailbox, and sure enough, there was an official HOA letter, signed by a man named Thomas Berger. It was filled with legal-sounding nonsense meant to assert some kind of authority over the lake. Just then, his phone rang. It was Peter Braun, his neighbor, a retired carpenter in his 70s. He'd known Daniel's grandfather, and had built his own lakeside house with his own 2 hands 50 years ago. A kind, nature-loving soul. "Morning, Daniel," Peter chuckled. "Looks like they finally noticed you, huh?" Daniel told him what happened, and Peter sighed. These HOA vultures get bolder every year. Ever since they built that luxury complex on the North Shore, they've been acting like they own the whole lake. Daniel was stunned. "Wait, they've been using my lake. If your grandpa saw the fishing tournaments they throw here now, he'd chase them out with a broom," Peter laughed. Turns out, this so-called elite anglers club had been holding big tournaments on the lake: tents, barbecues, temporary docks. The whole thing was proudly displayed on the HOA's official website, calling the lake the jewel of our community. Daniel had heard enough. He picked up the phone and called an old college friend, Laura Stein, now a sharp environmental lawyer. When he explained the situation, she burst out laughing. "So let me get this straight. You own the lake, but they're banning your boat? And they've been throwing events on your land for years?" "Daniel, That's straight-up trespassing. Laura offered to come up to the cabin that weekend. This is going to get messy, she said. But first, we gather evidence. Install cameras. Dig up old documents. Then we'll do what needs to be done. That day, Daniel made a decision. He wasn't just fighting for a boat. He was defending his grandfather's legacy. And the fight? It had just begun. Just like Laura had suggested, Daniel installed high-resolution motion sensor cameras all around the lake. The busiest shorelines, the temporary dock zones, and the eastern shore where the tournament tents were usually set up, all under surveillance now. The cameras had night vision and sent real-time alerts straight to his phone. Over the next few days, Daniel dove into old documents. In one of his father's filing cabinets, he found papers from his grandfather, including a property deed dated 1953. It clearly stated that the lake bed and a 15-meter buffer of shoreline were fully owned by the Weber family. There was also a land survey from 2010. His father had hired a professional surveyor to map the area and reaffirm the property lines. While going through all of that, an email popped up that caught his eye, an HOA community meeting invitation. It was dressed up in fancy, official language, but to Daniel, it looked like the perfect opportunity to see their real faces. Let's see how they act on their own turf, he said to himself. The meeting was being held at the Maple Creek Community Center, a pretentious building with fake Greek columns and a fountain out front. It reminded Daniel of the pitch decks from his startup days, all flash, no substance. He slipped in quietly and took a seat in the back row. Maybe 30 people were in the room, most of them looking bored and glancing at their watches. Then Thomas Berger walked on stage, and Daniel paid attention. Berger, late 50s, silver hair, blue press blazer, the guy practically radiated control issues. He moved like a country club president who'd gotten too used to being obeyed. After rambling about lawn heights and mailbox designs, he finally got to it. We've identified an unauthorized boat on our community lake, he said, with a forced seriousness. The lake is one of our most valuable assets, and we must preserve our aesthetic standards. Daniel raised his hand. Heads turned. Berger clearly didn't like the interruption, but gestured anyway. Yes, the gentleman in the back. Daniel stood up, calm voice, sharp words. You just referred to the lake as a community lake. What exactly do you mean by that? Who holds the deed? A murmur spread through the room. People looked between Daniel and Berger, whose smile flickered for a second. The lake falls under the management of the Maple Creek HOA. Berger replied, carefully. It's always been that way. It's a matter of structure and order. Daniel pressed on. So the HOA owns the deed? Or do you have a legal usage agreement from the municipality? Are there official documents that give you that authority? Some of the older residents were starting to nod thoughtfully. Berger gripped the edge of the podium. That's not the purpose of this meeting, he snapped. But you should know that all lake-related activities are within our jurisdiction. Daniel just nodded and sat back down. A few people were giving him curious glances now. Berger, on the other hand, was visibly rattled. After the meeting, as people filtered out, someone approached Daniel and held out his hand. Harold Koenig, president of the Elite Anglers Club. A man in his 60s, tanned from years outdoors, wearing an expensive-looking fishing vest. He smiled, but his eyes were sizing Daniel up. Looks like you're new around here. That old cabin, we thought nobody used it anymore. Daniel introduced himself. Weber family. That's our cabin. Still is. Harold's face shifted. I knew your grandfather. Tough man. Lived by his own rules. That last part stung a little. There was a smugness in how he said it. But Daniel didn't let it show. Our fishing club's a great community, Harold added, with a grin. Very exclusive members. You should join us sometime. Daniel put on his best poker face. Sounds interesting. When's the next event? Harold stood a little taller. Biggest tournament of the year, this Saturday. East Shoreline. Come by, check it out. Daniel thanked him. His plan was starting to come together now. That tournament would be the perfect time to catch the HOA's illegal activities in action on camera. As he walked out of the meeting, something caught his attention. Thomas Berger, Claudia Ryman, and Harold Koenig huddled together in a corner, whispering. Daniel moved closer, pretending to grab a cup of coffee nearby. What he heard chilled him. Let's speed up the timeline. We can't move forward until the Weber issue is resolved. Claudia glanced toward him, then walked off with the others. As Daniel stepped out into the cool evening air, one thing was crystal clear. This wasn't about a boat anymore. This was about protecting his grandfather's legacy, about defending nature's rights, about breaking the silence a family had been forced into for far too long. And this fight, it was just getting started. On Saturday morning, as sunlight danced across the surface of the lake, Daniel stepped onto his porch with a cup of coffee in hand. At first glance, everything looked peaceful. But beneath the calm, the waters were churning, because today was the day of the Maple Creek Estate's 15th annual Elite Anglers Fishing Tournament. On Daniel's land, before 8 a.m., the first vehicles began arriving at the lake's eastern shore. His surveillance footage showed Harold Koenig directing traffic, while tents, grills, and temporary docks were being set up at lightning speed. Daniel sat quietly on his porch, watching it all unfold through a pair of binoculars. Sitting beside him was Laura Stein, who'd arrived early that morning, viewing everything through what she called her legal lens. "This is disciplined, but bold lawlessness," Laura said. "They're throwing a full-blown festival on your property, right in broad daylight. No hesitation." By midday, the scene had turned into an absolute circus. Over 20 vehicles, 15 boats, more than 50 people. All of them had entered Daniel Weber's land without permission. But it wasn't just the boats and BBQs that mattered. At one point, Laura focused her binoculars and muttered under her breath, Well, look who just showed up." Thomas Berger was walking down the path toward the lake, flanked by 3 sharply dressed men in suits and designer sunglasses. They weren't there to fish. They had folders, tablets, and portfolios in hand. "Investors," Laura said, wrinkling her nose. "This isn't just a tournament. It's a sales pitch." Daniel and Laura moved quietly through the trees toward the eastern shoreline, long lens cameras in hand. And just as they expected, Thomas was in full performance mode, gesturing dramatically, pointing at maps, speaking like he owned the place. Then came the sentence that unlocked everything. "We control the entire shoreline. Just a few documents left. As far as use goes, the property's already ours." Laura kept filming without flinching. "Oh my God, this is straight up fraud. He's pitching private land to investors like it's his." The investors were poring over drawings of luxury homes and a marina. One woman asked, "Isn't there already someone living here?" "A landowner." Thomas's reply was ice cold. "Just one. We're in the process of reaching an agreement." Laura shook her head as she kept recording. "An agreement? Is this what they call negotiating, stealing a boat, issuing threats, trespassing?" That was the final straw for Daniel. These people had no respect for law or decency. But their game was over now. Laura pulled out her phone and made the call. "Hello? We're ready to file for an emergency injunction. I've just emailed the evidence to the judge." "Yes. Unauthorized tournament on private property under false authority." At 2:30 p.m., a local court issued an emergency order. "All events on Sullivan, Weber, Lake must cease immediately. No activity may take place on the property without the owner's consent. All trespassers must be removed." The order would be enforced with the assistance of a sheriff's deputy. And for the first time in days, a smile tugged at the corners of Daniel's mouth. By 3 p.m., Daniel and Laura arrived at the eastern shore, accompanied by a security officer and a uniformed deputy holding the court order. Smoke from the grills, loud music, cheerful banter. It all stopped as the deputy grabbed the microphone. "May I have your attention? This area is private property. A court order has been issued on behalf of the legal owner, Daniel Weber. The event must end immediately, and everyone is required to vacate the premises." The crowd froze. Harold Koenig turned beet red and stormed forward. "We've been holding this tournament for 15 years. What do you mean, private property?" Laura stepped forward, calm but commanding. "Mr. Koenig, this land belongs to the Weber family. The HOA has no legal authority over this lake. We have the deed, the survey maps, and the court order to prove it. Please leave the property." The crowd began to murmur. People looked at each other, whispering, "But we pay dues here." At that moment, Thomas Berger pushed through the crowd, the smug grin gone from his face. "This is outrageous. We've managed this lake for years. It's our right." Laura handed him a sealed envelope. "Here's what your management looks like: false representation, no legal ownership, and a fraudulent investor pitch on land that doesn't belong to you. That's called investment fraud." The investors turned toward Thomas, whispering furiously, A few of them headed straight for their cars. The crowd began breaking apart quickly. Tents were being taken down, boats loaded onto trailers. Daniel walked quietly over to Thomas. Takes guts to sell something you don't own, Thomas. But guts come with consequences. Thomas narrowed his eyes. This isn't over. You have no idea who I'm connected to. Daniel looked him dead in the eye, voice like steel. Then I hope you enjoy explaining that to a judge. That afternoon, the lake went silent. No music, no barbecue, just the sounds of birds and the quiet echo of a man reclaiming his legacy. Weber Lake had finally come home. After the tournament fell apart, the shoreline returned to silence. But it wasn't peace, it was the calm before the storm. Because the real battle had only just begun. The next morning, as Daniel sipped his coffee on the porch, Laura was on the phone, her voice sharp and focused. On the other end was local journalist Nina Fisher. They'd contacted her on Peter Braun's recommendation. Known for her hard-hitting exposés on HOA corruption, Nina was sharp, relentless, and allergic to bullshit. Laura walked her through the events at the lake, the court ruling, and some of the evidence they had, but not everything. The element of surprise still mattered. There was a pause. Then Nina's voice came through with quiet determination. If what you're saying is true, this isn't just a property dispute. This is an organized attempt at land theft. I want to interview you. Tomorrow. The meeting took place the next day in a small cafe. Nina, in her mid-30s, had the kind of eyes that scanned every detail and a pen that never left her hand. She listened carefully as Daniel shared his story, while Laura laid out the legal documents. So these people have been acting like they own the lake, hosting tournaments, pitching investors, presenting development plans, all without ever producing a single deed. Laura nodded. Not one document. Just years of playing pretend and making everyone else believe it. Nina's eyes lit up. This is big. And it won't just shake Maple Creek. This could set an example for every similar community out there. Daniel asked her not to publish anything just yet. The game wasn't over. Nina agreed, but scribbled a note in her journal. Lake owner, Daniel Weber. Investor fraud. Court order. False authority. Unknown public fund usage. That same evening, a sleek black BMW pulled up outside Daniel's cabin. The man who stepped out was all too familiar, Thomas Berger. No blazer this time. Just a carefully chosen, friendly shirt. He stopped at the door with a forced smile. Mr. Weber, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Daniel let him in without a word. Laura was already inside, waiting quietly in the kitchen, listening. Thomas made some small talk about the cabin's charm, then got to the point. Look, this whole boat thing, it got out of hand. But we can work it out. We'd like to offer you a special agreement. You keep your boat on the lake, no issue. All we ask is, you sign this. Daniel glanced at the paper. In short, it was a document stating that he acknowledged the HOA's management authority over the lake. Just to keep his boat on his own lake, he'd have to surrender control. Daniel read it slowly. So according to this, I'm agreeing to be under your management. Does that include this Saturday's fishing tournament too? Thomas stiffened. I wasn't aware you knew about that. Daniel shrugged. Harold invited me. Seems like a big deal. Thomas tried to smile again, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Yes, it's one of our proudest traditions. Just needs a little structure, that's all. Daniel placed the paper back on the table. And what about the resort project? The luxury homes by the lake? Does this little agreement cover that too? A flicker of panic passed through Thomas's face. I'm not sure what you've heard. Laura stepped in from the kitchen and picked up the document. It's not about what we've heard. It's what we've seen. We recorded you pitching the lake to investors. Selling property you don't own isn't just shady. It's illegal. Thomas shook his head. Look, this could be a win-win. It would bring in jobs, boost the economy. You could benefit too. That's when Daniel saw it clearly. This man wasn't negotiating. He was scheming. You know what's a benefit to me? Protecting my grandfather's legacy. This lake isn't a product. It's a responsibility. Thomas sighed and dropped the mask. I could make you a serious offer. Annual payment for lake access. Or equity in the project. Daniel stood up. Your offer is declined. And if my boat isn't returned by the end of the week, I'll be filing a criminal complaint. Thomas paused, then headed toward the door. But before he left, he turned with one final threat. Don't underestimate the people I know in this region. You could find yourself very alone. But Daniel wasn't alone anymore. He looked at Laura and gave a simple nod. It's time people knew the truth. Let Nina run the story. One day later, the local newspaper hit the stands with a bold headline. HOA scandal. Tried to sell a lake they didn't own. Subheadline. Investors misled. Property owner fights back. The article echoed through the entire town. By evening, it was all over social media, reposted, quoted, dissected. Daniel's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Some called to offer support. Others, residents from nearby communities, wanted answers. The board of Maple Creek Estates called an emergency meeting. As for Thomas Berger, he vanished. The fallout from the newspaper story didn't stop at Maple Creek. Communities all over the region joined the discussion on social media. News outlets began quoting Nina Fisher's article, using one viral headline. Those who thought they owned the lake just learned how small they really are. By the end of the day, Thomas Berger's name wasn't just showing up in HOA emails. It had reached the district attorney's office. That evening, Nina called Daniel, her voice shaking with excitement. "You're not going to believe this. Thomas Berger isn't even his real name." Laura put the phone on speaker. Nina continued. "His real name is Thomas Bear. He had his real estate license revoked in Florida. Tried to sell land using fake documents. Barely dodged 2 fraud convictions. Changed his name and moved here." There was a beat of silence before Laura replied, her tone ice cold. "This isn't just unethical anymore. This is a criminal pattern. We're filing a criminal complaint." And they did. The district attorney's office launched an investigation into Thomas for fraud, misrepresentation, and investor deception. But Thomas had already vanished. His BMW was gone from the garage. No one saw him again. Karen Ryman, the HOA's vice president, showed up to the emergency meeting alone. Her eyes were full of panic. The room, full of Maple Creek residents, was seething. The first question came from retired Judge Martin Schuster. "You said you used our HOA dues to maintain the lake. Which lake would that be?" The room erupted. Someone shouted, "What happened to all the tournament fees? Who came up with the resort plans?" Karen squirmed. Finally, she broke down. "I just signed where he told me. Thomas had the contacts. He handled the paperwork." But Judge Schuster lifted a folder in his hand. "There are emails here with your name on them, Ms. Ryman. You were part of this." That night, 3 HOA board members resigned, including Karen Ryman. The next day, Daniel, Laura, and Martin sat around a small table. The old system was gone, but something better had to take its place. Daniel made a quiet proposal. "The lake can't be open to everyone, but it shouldn't be closed to good people either. Just like my grandfather did. If you respect it, you're welcome." And so, the Weber Lake Conservation Foundation was born. Laura established its legal foundation. Martin Schuster was named chairman. Daniel took a symbolic role as its steward. Now, if local residents wanted lake access, they could apply through the foundation. A small yearly fee went straight to preserving the water and protecting the wildlife. The old Elite Anglers Club was dissolved. In its place, the Weber Lake Nature Fishers were founded. Membership was free, but every member had to take one oath: respect the lake. Don't harm it. Share it. Harold Koenig moved out of town. Thomas Berger's former investors filed suit against him. An audit with the HOA's former accountant revealed thousands of dollars in missing dues, still unaccounted for. As for Daniel's boat, the quiet little fishing boat that became a symbol of the entire fight, it was returned to the shore the following week. The newly elected HOA president brought it back personally and apologized. Sheriff deputies began making regular patrols around the lake. And Daniel? He was no longer just a former software engineer. He was the guardian of a legacy. From his porch, sipping his coffee, watching kids fish from the dock, he thought, "My grandfather never sold this place." Because you can't sell water. Water is meant to give life. Laura visited often. She wasn't just his lawyer anymore. She was his closest friend. Peter Braun still stopped by each morning with his fishing rod, tipping his hat and saying, "Looks like your grandfather's stories are still swimming in this lake." A small stone monument was placed by the shore. It read, "Water is life. It can't be bought, only protected. Friedrich Weber." One day, Daniel found an old box in the cabin. Inside, a black and white photo of his grandfather smiling on the boat, holding a giant bass in his arms. Daniel had it framed and placed it above the fireplace. Every morning, he'd look up at it and whisper the same words. "I did it, Grandpa. I protected the lake. And I protected you." And as he rowed out onto the lake in that same, non-compliant little boat, he wasn't just catching fish anymore. He was reeling in justice. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like, because every story might open someone else's eyes. And who knows, maybe one day, your story will be told here too.